The armies of Qin Shi Huang were said to be invincible under heaven, yet they once suffered defeat at the hands of a mighty southern alliance, an alliance forged by a king of Vietnam. As recorded by the historian Sima Qian, they camped in useless lands, unable to advance, unable to retreat. The men wore armor from day to night. The women hauled supplies. Life was so harsh they could not endure it. Along the roads, soldiers hanged themselves. Tens of thousands of Qin soldiers perished. This was a forgotten war, buried in the shadows of history, where the so-called invincible Qin met ruin in the southern lands. In 218 BC, the Viet people south of the Yangtze River faced the onslaught of 500,000 Qin soldiers. Their leader, Thục Phán, employed for the first time the strategy of scorched earth, leaving behind empty villages and ruined fields, retreating with his people into the forests. From there, constant raids struck the invaders without rest. The Qin army, marching from afar, found no local supplies to sustain them. Their general was skilled, maneuvering to hunt down the main Viet force. But every movement carried the risk of ambush. For the Âu Viet were not only masters of the ambush, they were fierce warriors even in open battle. Men and women alike. With the advantage of their homeland, the Viets chose the battlegrounds themselves. Qin soldiers suffered heavily chasing the Viet through the jungles. Only to be ambushed again by noble warriors clad in Viet bronze armor upon the plains. Each Qin counterattack was broken by the special troops of the southern lands. For the first time, they faced a mighty Bayou alliance. Many tribes united together. And among them were warrior women, something the Qin had never witnessed before. Qin forces were surrounded and annihilated. Against them fell the full weight of Bayou warfare and technology. Even the Qin commander himself perished in the southern wilderness. But a ruler like Qin Shi Huang would not accept defeat. He quickly raised fresh armies, appointed new generals, harsher and more decisive than the last, and pressed the campaign once more. This second invasion succeeded, in part because the leader of the previous Bayou alliance was no longer there to resist. That leader, Thục Phán, had gone south into the Red River Delta, where he merged with the kingdom of Van Lang to create the powerful state of Âu Lạc. It was a realm of advanced civilization, with fertile fields feeding a dense population, and thriving knowledge in technology and science. Yet even glory ends in tragedy. Thục Phán, who had never known defeat, would face his first and final loss 29 years later, at the cost of his life and his dynasty.
We would talk about the nature of An Duong Vuong's victory over the Qin army. The first factor to mention is the unity of the Bách Việt tribes. In terms of numbers, combat capability, the strength of individual military branches, and even military technology, the Bách Việt tribes were by no means inferior to the Qin. The reason they were so easily conquered lay in their lack of unity. With 500,000 troops, the Qin could steadily defeat one tribe of a few thousand warriors after another, or even manipulate one Bách Việt tribe into fighting against another. This was the classic strategy of divide and conquer. We saw the same pattern when Europeans subdued the Americas, or when the Romans conquered Gaul. But when An Duong Vuong managed to forge, even if only temporarily, a unified alliance, he proved that the military strength of the Bách Việt could defeat the invincible armies of Qin Shi Huang. The second point worth noting is An Duong Vuong's use of an ancient scorched earth strategy. The Bách Việt alliance at that time carried out this strategy with remarkable determination. There was a comprehensive and enduring mobilization. The entire population was involved, not only on a wide scale, but also over a sustained period of time. The people evacuated their land, leaving the Qin with territory but no inhabitants. To survive, the Qin soldiers had to hunt, gather, or farm. Yet relentless ambushes launched from the forests forced them into constant warfare. Gradually, they were drained of strength without ever securing stable supplies. The Qin army also had to endure the humid climate and devastating epidemics. The humid climate brought waves of diseases. It is important to stress that in ancient times, medical knowledge was nowhere near today's standards. Diseases that are now easily treatable with antibiotics were then often death sentences. In those days, when people migrated from one type of terrain to another, it could take generations for their bodies to adapt and enhance immune system. For Qin soldiers from the northern plains, southern diseases were truly terrifying. There was also the challenge of maintaining long food supply lines. The Qin were forced to rely on grain shipments from the north, but these supply routes were constantly harassed and sabotaged. The vast distances of southern China itself became a disadvantage they had to face. About 70% of the provisions sent were lost before reaching their destination.
Why did An Duong Vuong choose to consolidate power in the south, in the land of Bách Việt, instead of expanding northward into Linh Nam to continue fighting the Qin? First issue is difficulty of maintaining long-term leadership over the Bách Việt. An Duong Vuong temporarily became the leader of the Bách Việt alliance during the resistance. But this did not mean the other Bách Việt kingdoms would continue to accept his leadership afterward. He had authority in wartime, but that very prestige was also a double-edged sword, making other tribal leaders wary of him. A striking parallel is found in the story of Arminius, the Germanic hero of the Cherushi tribe. He orchestrated the legendary ambush in the Teutoburg forest, annihilating 3 Roman legions. Yet, was later assassinated by his own people out of fear that his power had grown too great. Foreign enemies are formidable, but internal politics can sometimes be even harder to manage. This pattern would later repeat itself as a tragedy for the Trung sisters, a story we will cover in the next video. The second factor to take into account is its counterbalancing position. The Lac Viet region was home to the advanced Dong Son culture, a relatively high level of civilization and a dense population. Its fertile Red River Delta offered prosperity and resources, making it an ideal base to establish a true state, one capable of serving as a counterweight to the north. It is likely that An Duong Vuong sought to build the most powerful Bac Viet kingdom here, with the hope that future generations could gradually unify. The third factor of great importance is strategic distance as a buffer zone. The geographical gap between Qin's heartland and Lac Viet created a natural buffer that reduced the risk of immediate large-scale retaliation. Despite having the capability to win in battlefields, why did the Bac Viet still fall to conquest? This came down to three key factors. First of all is logistical power. You may have heard the saying, Rome conquered the world by building roads. Faster movement, swifter military supply, and thriving trade created immense military potential for empires like Rome, Qin, and Han. The longer the war dragged on, the more this advantage came into play. Even if the Bac Viet won 9 battles in a row, they would still lose the decisive 10th battle against an enemy with virtually unlimited supplies. This was also the bitter tragedy of Hannibal Barca of Carthage. Secondly, there was internal division. The Bac Viet were a patchwork of kingdoms and tribes that lacked unity. Each faction had its own interests, and not all opposed Huaxia domination. Some even sought to destroy one another. So while we often speak of the Bac Viet resisting Qin, in reality only a handful of the stronger tribes truly stood against the storm. In this sense, the Oviet resembled the Arverni in Gaul, a powerful faction led by a strong leader, temporarily forming a military alliance. What set the Âu Lạc alliance apart was not only its military and economic strength, but also its rare spark of national consciousness. It was one of the very few Bac Viet alliances that forged a founding myth, capable of uniting its people and resisting the empire's classic divide and rule tactics. This leads us to a thought experiment. If the Bac Viet factions had truly succeeded in unifying and sustaining themselves under a shared national identity, could history have seen the rise of a Bac Viet empire? What new variables might have emerged? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below.
Long ago, there was a people of the rice civilization who lived by the rhythm of the waters in the fields. They had warriors, brave and loyal. Cavalry clad in bronze armor. And archers whose arrows were tipped with poison. They dwelled in tall, stilt houses to guard against beasts and floods. Mastered the art of metalworking, and followed a matrilineal order in their society. But where did their ancestors come from? Legend says they were the descendants of a fairy and a dragon. The union of these two mighty beings, one born of the waters, the other of the mountains, brought forth a giant egg sac from which 100 children hatched. 50 followed their father, the dragon lord, down to the sea, while 50 went with their mother, the fairy, up into the mountains. It is said that from then on, mountain and water became the eternal elements bound to this people's soul.